It is the obvious game of the year in college football when we talk Mississippi State at number 1, traveling to Tuscaloosa to take on the Tide at number 4 right now in the nation. Actually, they're number 5 outside the College Football Playoff Committee, but it's all in front of them to finish in that top 4. We bring in Justin Sutton of For Whom the Cowbell Tolls on SB Nation to bail out my voice. Justin, help me out here because we need some good insight and information, and I'm not going to make it to the finish line. So we bring you in to talk this one up. Mississippi State going to Bama. I want to get your insight into State possibly hitting the biggest stage in the history of the program versus kind of we do this a couple times a year at Bama, and how you think that this might affect the Mississippi State football team.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, Mark, first things first. For the Bulldogs, this is maybe their 3rd, 4th biggest game in the history of the program, and they played them all in one season. You know, you go back to the LSU game, and everybody said, wow, this game's just huge because if the Bulldogs win this one, this puts them in position to do something they haven't done in a long time. They go down to Baton Rouge, they win. And it was like, wow, we're on the top 10 cusp, a chance to be higher than ever before in the rankings. Here comes the big bad Aggies. The Bulldogs jump into that game and win that one, setting up which was without a doubt the biggest game in the history of Mississippi State against Auburn. The win over the Tigers, pushing the Bulldogs to the number 1 ranking in the country, which they had never held before, and they have not relinquished since that point. But here they are again for the 4th time this year playing what might be the biggest game in the program's history. I think having done that so many times this year takes a little bit of the edge and a little bit of the nervousness out of this game. They've been there before when everything's been on the line. And at this point, having proven themselves a bit, I think even when you start thinking about the bigger picture, the national championships and things like that, the Bulldogs can come in this game a little bit more relaxed, having proved themselves through 9 games, knowing that if we lose right here and we play competitively, we're probably still going to play for the national championship in that playoff come January. So I think in some ways the pressure's a little bit off Mississippi State. They can lose this game and still hook the Titans and backdoor their way into an SEC West championship at this point. Where for Alabama, I think they might come in this game a little bit more tense, a little bit more pressure. The last thing the Crimson Tide want to do is watch Mississippi State all but wrap up the SEC West championship on the hollow turf of Bryant-Denny Stadium. They don't want to see that happen. So I think in some ways maybe a little bit scarier, a little bit more tense situation for the Crimson Tide coming in this game, knowing that their season can go up in smoke Saturday, while the Bulldogs can still parachute out and still have a little bit of a chance there.
So let's talk about the quandary that could be presented to the College Football Playoff Committee based on the results of this game. So I think if the Tide goes out there and just hammers it down at 42-10 or something ridiculous like that, then Mississippi State could be in serious trouble. But if this is a close game and Mississippi State loses by a field goal in a really good football game, wow, it makes it difficult on this College Football Playoff Committee, especially if the Ohio States and the Oregons and the TCUs hold serve, that how can you possibly, this team that's been number 1 since the 4th or 5th week in the season, that loses at Alabama, that maybe Vegas considers the best team in the country at this point, considering the point spread.
Right.
Mississippi State goes to Bama. Can you really drop this team out of the top 4, especially if they hold serve against Ole Miss, that's still a top 10 team?
Yeah, you know, that's a very good point there, Mark. I think the thing you have to look at is this. If you look at what this committee's done, I think if you look at the rankings consistently, this committee so far has given a lot of weight to the SEC. When SEC teams have lost to other SEC teams, they haven't dropped much. Look at Auburn. They lost to an unranked A&M team. They're still in the top 10. A&M climbs into the top 25. Ole Miss now with 2 losses. They're still sitting in the top 10 as well. This committee, I think, values the strength of the SEC. And one thing that's really interesting to note, they put Oregon ahead of Florida State last week, and an undefeated Florida State dropped behind a one-loss team, and I think rightfully so. I don't think we know how good Florida State is, if they are as good as everybody thinks they might be. We don't know that. And this Oregon team, their one loss was not a close loss. It was kind of an ugly loss earlier this year. And so I think this committee understands you might have a bad game here or there. And I think if the Bulldogs lose, and especially if it's a competitive loss, I really don't see the Bulldogs slipping out. I think at the end of the day, if you're number 1 and you travel to a solid number 5 and you lose by a couple of points, that doesn't automatically make you not one of the top 4 teams in the country anymore. And on the flip side, if Alabama loses by a point to Mississippi State, I don't think they're going to drop far from the number 5 spot. I think this committee has a different mindset than what we've seen in college football before, especially with the polls. Because with the polls, it's just kind of like, oh, you lose, we got to drop you behind all these people. I never thought that made sense. You have 1 against 2, and 2 loses to 1 by a point, and all of a sudden 2 is now number 7. What kind of math is that? I have no idea because it doesn't make any sense. And I think we've got some good minds on this college football playoff committee that aren't getting hung up in just wins and losses, but really looking at trying to determine who are the top 4 teams. And that's a tough job. It's a job I would love to have, don't get me wrong, but it'd be difficult in the process. But I don't think if the Bulldogs lose and it's close that they have to worry about dropping on the top 4. I think everything will still be there for them to win. And, of course, we're going to have some Armageddon happen with some of these teams down the road. You look at Oregon, they're going to play Arizona State probably for the Pac-12 championship, all that. So there's going to be some teams that are going to pick each other off along the way as well. So I think this committee is very open-minded. And I think TCU Baylor's another example of that, keeping the Bears below TCU, even though TCU, Baylor won the head-to-head. I think they look at the whole body of work and they think TCU is a better team. So I think this is a very open-minded committee, and it's going to make it fun to watch it play out.
Yeah, I think the one issue Mississippi State could have, Justin, is that if they do lose, see, they've been separated from everybody else, excluding Florida State till now because they are undefeated, and especially as an SEC undefeated with the track record they have against A&M and LSU and against Auburn especially. But once they lose that game, see, they've been kind of immune to the pot shots of winning that ugly game against Arkansas or to a certain extent Kentucky. But once they get lobbed in with everybody else that has one loss, then the non-conference schedule comes into play, and some of those somewhat ugly losses against marginal football teams may come into play. And I don't know how much pressure the committee's going to feel in the first year to represent as many conferences as possible. And if you've got a Mississippi State team that's not playing in Atlanta when Ohio State's playing the same day in a Big Ten title game and Oregon's playing, that it may be a difficult decision, but one that is decided that the SEC only gets the one slot.
You end up doing it more politically there, I think, than anything else. I don't know. That is an interesting concept, I think, Mark, to look at. So far, I think the respect they've shown the SEC is what I think if you're a Mississippi State fan, you got to hope on. They've shown a lot of respect for the SEC so far in the rankings when they come up with the top 10, even out to the top 15, a lot of SEC flavor in that. I think that's what you got to hope for. But you're right. You do lose that game. You open up to the fact that out of conference, you played UAB, you played Southern Miss, you played South Alabama, you played UT Martin. But I think what Mississippi State has to hang their hat on, that a lot of teams in that situation wouldn't have to hang their hat on, you've got to win over Auburn, who's in the top 10. You've got to win, assuming they win the Egg Bowl, over Ole Miss, who was a top 10 team. You played them. A win over LSU, who's been firmly in the top 20 most of the year, and a win over Texas A&M, who's in the top 25. I think at the end of the day, those big wins help Mississippi State mitigate the fact they did play a pretty sad out-of-conference schedule when it all came down to it.
All right, Justin, let's get on the field. The national media likes to latch on to the big names, the big stories, and it's been Dak Prescott. He's had a remarkable year. At the same time, I think one glaring stat that's been pointed out to me in the last few days is a 13-2 touchdown-to-pick ratio to start the season, but 3 touchdowns, 5 interceptions against the 3 toughest SEC opponents that he's faced recently. Do you have any concerns about his performance and his mindset going to Tuscaloosa?
I think the big concern, for most Mississippi State fans right now is ever since the win over Auburn, the Bulldogs have not looked the sharpest team in the SEC. They went to Kentucky, winning the game by 14 points. A lot of times Mississippi State fans would have taken that game and been absolutely ecstatic. Hey, we won the game. That's great. And then, I'm up at Kentucky watching that game, and there's people just fretting over the fact that it was only a 14-point win over Kentucky. Part of that fretting, though, I think, came Mississippi State didn't look extremely sharp at times. Prescott made a couple of bad throws against the Wildcats that were turned into interceptions. Kentucky scores points most of the time. They're going to get 30. Now, how many they give up, we don't know. So giving up those points maybe not as scary. You go to the Arkansas game, and a game that there was tons of tension in the stands at Davis Wade Stadium. You could cut it with a knife because it seemed like Mississippi State couldn't get going. Arkansas was just doing everything Arkansas needed to do to pull off an upset. And the Bulldogs just didn't quite look sharp, coming up high, almost making arm tackles at times. But at the end of the day, the Bulldogs corrected the ship. They got back on track, and they took care of Arkansas. UT Martin at times looked a little bit sloppy, the high tackles, the arm tackles. I think right now the big question, Dak Prescott, the defense, everybody, that's been a little bit of the execution. Some drop passes, some bad tackles, some questionable reads on throws from Dak Prescott. I think just in general, the execution the Bulldogs' game plan offensively and defensively has been a little bit worrisome. But, I'll tell you this, though, Mark. You can only really get up for so many games in the season, and that's any sport. You watch golf, you talk about players trying to peak for the 4 majors, and they schedule their whole season around that. They know you can only be at your absolute best so many times. Coaches know that, players know that. And if I'm a coach, I'm not going to put so much work into Arkansas that we're up at our best there, but we can't be able to get back up at our best for Alabama. I think that's where we're going to learn a lot about this Mississippi State team. Can they rise back up to this challenge? They rode that wave for 3 weeks in the early part of the season. Can they jump back on that wave now for the last 3 games? They got this one against Alabama, a little bit of a letdown game with Vanderbilt, and then the big game against Ole Miss. If this is a real championship caliber team, and these Bulldogs have a chance to be playing in Dallas in January 2015, we'll know this weekend and we'll know 2 weekends from now if the Bulldogs get up to the challenge of taking on Alabama and Ole Miss on the road. If they can't get up to that challenge, they won't be in Dallas. If they can, they will be in Dallas, I think, play for the national championship.
So staying on the same theme, Justin, of course, from a national perspective, the big stats, the big plays, the big moments create this huge narrative. So offensively, for Josh Robinson, it's that this guy's been until he threw like 18 guys off of him at Kentucky on the sideline and just went crazy. And then that's all over the place for days and days and days. So people know Josh Robinson now. How pivotal and integral to this offense do you think he'll be on Saturday?
I think Josh Robinson is the linchpin of this game Saturday. Dak Prescott is going to get his. And a lot of people talking about this game being the Heisman moment for Dak Prescott. And it could very well be. I think if the Bulldogs win, Prescott's got to have a Dak Prescott-type game, over 200 in the air, approaching 100 on the ground. I think the big surprise is going to be Josh Robinson. Nobody has found a way to completely shut him down this year. He played against Arkansas, didn't get 100 yards on the ground, but he found a way to get 100 yards in the air. Josh Robinson has proven to be a threat in the running game. He's proven to be a threat in the passing game. And he's starting to look even better and better at finding holes and getting around the defense and making things happen. I think the Bulldogs win this game. Josh Robinson is going to turn into a surprise performance. I think he'll go over 100 on the ground, maybe 125, find a way to get in the end zone on twice for the Bulldogs. And have that kind of game that nobody really expected a running back to put up against Alabama, because you look at Alabama historically, nobody does that against them. If the Bulldogs win this game, it's going to be a game like that from Josh Robinson. It's going to surprise some folks. And you might even start hearing his name be whispered around dark horse. Could he find a way to get enough votes to try to end up in New York, that kind of thing. I think Josh Robinson, unfortunately for him, has really been overshadowed by the season Dak Prescott's having. Josh Robinson's having a fantastic season of his own. He just happens to share a backfield with a quarterback that's proven to be one of the most dynamic quarterbacks of the last few seasons. But it's kind of good. He's been able to fly under the radar. I think he'll be much more of a nationally known commodity, though, after this game on Saturday.
So the reason I like to talk to guys like you, Justin, is to get the actual breakdown of the personnel and the matchups, because we hear the big narratives nationally. And again, it's been that Mississippi State's not used to the big stage, but Alabama is. It's number 2, Dak Prescott's trying to win a Heisman Trophy. And it's number 3, that the Bulldogs are 120th, I think, in the nation in pass defense, and that they can't defend the pass. And what are they going to do? Amari Cooper's on the other side of the ball. So bring some reality to us.
Yeah, I mean, look, Mississippi State, until the Arkansas game, only trailed for a handful of minutes the entire season. So teams nationally were going to throw the ball more in those situations. And when teams throw the ball more, guess what you're going to do? You are going to give up more passing yards. If you get a significant lead, you're not going to be playing right up on somebody. You'll give up 5, 10 yards underneath and let a team get down the field. But what this Mississippi State defense does is you might move down the field a bit. You get to the 20, this defense bows up. It becomes a completely different defense. I'm not going to take anything away from Amari Cooper. He's a great wide receiver. He's very talented. Blake Simmons is a talented quarterback. I'm not going to be surprised if Cooper has a good game. For Mississippi State, the trick's going to be let Cooper have his, and don't let the other guys get there. It's kind of like when you used to play the Bulls. Michael Jordan's Michael Jordan. He's going to get his points. Just try to limit Scottie Pippen for what he does. Same thing with Amari Cooper. He might get 100 yards. He might find the end zone. The Bulldogs can live with that. I think what Mississippi State's going to want to do, and this is where they do so much good things, they can do a good job keeping the receivers in check, keeping it from them, and letting that front 7 get to the quarterback. You got an amazing defensive line right there at Mississippi State. Preston Smith, all the damage he did at the beginning of the season, winning 3 consecutive Defensive Lineman of the Week award, something that never happened in the SEC. Chris Jones, the all-world sophomore that Mississippi State has. And other guys that haven't gotten a love yet. Nick James, who's come in and just been a guy that eats up 2 linemen on his own, and Curtis Burgess and A.J. Jefferson. Those guys doing great work on the defensive line. Your linebackers coming in Richie Brown, Beniquez Brown. You've got guys like Bernard McKinney coming in. Matt Wells, who's just done a fantastic job that I think gets forgotten about sometimes. All these guys do a great job. Their goal as that front seven is going to be to disrupt the Alabama running game and make Sims' life just crazy on Saturday. Chase him around, flush him out of the park, make him uncomfortable. And that alone, even the Bulldogs were really and truly 120th ranked passing, 220th best pass defense in the country, which they're much better than. That alone would be enough to bail those corners out. Those corners can make enough plays. They've had a lot of interceptions hit them in the hands this year. They catch a couple of those, this game becomes completely different. I think the overall total package of the Mississippi State defense is going to do a much better job shutting down Amari Cooper and folks than people think. Cooper's not going to get 250 yards like some people are acting like because a couple of UAB receivers slipped behind in Game 2 of the season. That's not the story here. It's people looking at the wrong stats. And most folks who really follow football know that. If you're always ahead, you're going to give up more passing yards. That's why for years we loved Matt Stafford in fantasy football because the Lions are going to be losing 21-0 in the first quarter. Stafford was going to throw it 60 times. It's been the same thing for the Bulldogs in 2014. I'd rather my team be giving up a lot of passing yards than giving up a whole lot of yards on the ground because normally you can give up a lot of passing yards and win. You give up a lot of rushing yards, you typically lose that football game.
Yeah, we've gone to sabermetrics in baseball. We've become more intelligent with all these statistics, but we still rank teams based on total yardage, pass offense, and so forth. It's just crazy. Yeah, pass efficiency defense would be the way to go, right. And then maybe add a situational category to it as well. So anyway, my favorite question to you just about every time, Justin, is for that person who's watching Mississippi State for the first time. They watch the big games, and so, bam, this is the game this week. Maybe some names that we're not that familiar with outside the SEC that we could see play a key role this week.
Yeah, I'll tell you one name to keep an eye on, and he's kind of made a little bit of a name for himself. That's DeRunnya Wilson. You also call him Bear Wilson, sophomore wide receiver from Mississippi State. Fantastic athlete. He was Mr. Basketball in Alabama. Played football his senior year, and Dan Mullen Company said, hey, why don't you come play football for us? The guy's got all kinds of physical tools, 6'5", 220, fast, strong, great hands. Lots of times he's double-teamed. He doesn't get a whole lot of catches in the game, but he might draw 1 or 2 pass interferences in the game as well. He's the kind of player I think that when all is said and done in his career, he may go down as the best wide receiver in the history of Mississippi State football. Now, granted, that may not be saying a whole lot, but there's been some good wide receivers come through there. Eric Molds, Marty McDowell, some other guys who have done a great job. He's one, if you haven't watched Mississippi State play, keep your eye on him because he can make fantastic plays. Another name that some folks have maybe forgotten about this year, Jamion Lewis. He's been hurt most of the year. Another talented wide receiver. Dan Mullen says he is 100% and expects him to play against Alabama. If he suits up, that's a big one. The third wide receiver I'm going to give you as well, Fred Ross. He has become a little bit more of a safety blanket for Dak Prescott as DeRunnya Wilson's kind of been taken away from him by opposing defenses. Fred Ross has a way of going about making plays. He's made some circus catches this year. Finds a way to haul in pretty much anything near his hands. So keep an eye on those 3 wide receivers. We know about Josh Robinson. We know about Dak Prescott. That's the offense. Jumping over to the defense, I think a couple of names you might want to keep an eye on. Will Redmond. He might be on the pace to set the record for most games suspended in a career. I think he's missed 19 games due to suspension. Won the incredibly silly long 18-game suspension over like an $1,800 discount on a car. And then he was suspended against the UT Martin game. But he has really shown up to be a serious threat to an offense. The way he can play defense, he can get up there. He looks like a lockdown corner. He can shut down an opposing receiver. He finds a way to make the big interceptions when they need to be made. He's a guy to keep an eye on. That whole defensive line, I don't know who's going to make the big play. Watch the Mississippi State defensive line. And then if you look in the linebacker group, look for, a lot of people know who Bernard McKinney is. Looking probably going to be an NFL first, second round draft pick at the end of the season. But some other guys keep an eye on. Matt Wells, I think he's the linebacker who can have a big game. He has safety speed. He can cover like a safety, but he can hit like a linebacker and do some damage. I think Matt Wells could have a really big game for Mississippi State when it's all said and done.
Of course, Redmond's the guy that possibly saved the season with that end zone pick against Arkansas.
Exactly. A terrible pass defense.
That's right. That's right. But we don't count interceptions. Justin.
No, doesn't matter.
All right, Justin Sutton joins us from SB Nation, always doing a first job for us from For Whom the Cowbell Tolls. And, Justin, this is maybe how you're going to sound after the game on Saturday, but thanks so much for joining us and taking us through.
Hey, always glad to do it. It's huge. I hope people watch it. I just got done taping my show on Bullies Sports Radio. We do call-ins on Thursday nights. Had about 6 people called in, most we've ever had in 1 hour. So it's why I was able to talk so easily tonight. I didn't have to say anything on my show. I just hit record and listen to people talk. But it's going to be huge. People are fired up. People are going to laugh. They're going to cry. They're going to scream. They're going to bleed. Who knows what's going to happen? It's just going to be a lot of fun for Bulldog fans one way or another.
Good stuff, Justin. Thanks so much.
Always, Mark. Glad to join you.